So why don't you provide the microphone to the questioners,
Great.
and I'll try to keep my answers concise so we can get as many questions as possible.
Sounds good to me. Who among our group from DDI would like to ask the first question? Don't be shy.
Come on, step right up. Here we go.
Conch.
So I have a kind of technical question about what your position on executive power is. So, so Donald Trump has spent a lot of time using executive orders to govern the country. Very recently, the Saudi Arabia arms deal, he's tried to leverage executive power and emergency powers to bypass Congress to sell arms to Saudi Arabia. What would your position be on expanding or restricting executive power?
So, and this is the same attacks that people used against Barack Obama. So, one side or the other is consistently attacking the president for excessive use of executive power. I think the key is to look at why is it that we are so divided. And personally, I'm not, as a mayor and as a governor, I think my experience in executive office, where it's really a different set of experiences. When you're a mayor or a governor, you learn to put together a team and figure out how to get people to work together. How do you create a vision of what the solution for each problem is going to be, and then you motivate your team, you hold them accountable, and you actually deliver results. It's very different than what happens in Washington. In Washington, I think sometimes that especially the Republicans in Washington, I don't want to offend anybody in the room, but more and more they've ignored things like climate change and pretended they don't exist. So they stick their hand in the sand. I call them the ostriches. But in a funny way, sometimes the whole political machine in Washington is like a giant whale, and is difficult to move, and there's such massive programs, even some of the things proposed by the Democrats, and have hidden costs and unintended consequences. So I think it's more important that we focus on how do we get people to work together. In terms of your specific question, selling arms to the Saudis, I mean that is traditionally something that is done through the military branch, and those kinds of sales often have happened independently of our diplomatic efforts. I think it's a legitimate question. Shouldn't that be orchestrated as part of our diplomatic effort, right? Is that part of what you're asking, right? Are you suggesting that Congress actually control who we sell arms to?
No, I was just asking, I guess, would you allow Congress to have any insight in foreign policy? Yeah, sure. Would you allow Congress to have any insight in foreign policy, or would you allow
Sure.
that prerogative to the executive branch?
So the War Powers Act, obviously, what has happened is we have moved away from Congress having a loud voice in foreign policy. And in that question, I certainly agree. I would argue that probably the most important role the president has is the role as commander-in-chief in charge of the safety and the security, not just of this country, but to a large extent the world. And I would tell you the first thing I wouldn't do is ignore the advice and counsel of the most experienced military and intelligence officers in the world, which is what President Trump has done. I would not empty out the State Department. Someone told me last week that there are over 1,000 desks in the State Department that there's no one working. They haven't hired the people that have left. We've turned in this isolationist way away from engagement with the world, and I think it makes us less safe. The tariff wars that President Trump is using as a tool of his foreign diplomacy, I think I cannot find a single economist, and maybe Min can give me an example, but I'm not aware of any example where there's ever been anything in a tariff war but losers. No one wins. No one comes out better.
No winners.
No winners. Thank you. And no one's talking about that. So again, in terms of bringing Congress into diplomacy, part of this is helping decide what is our appropriate trade relationships, right? In other words, Congress has to approve the large treaties. The TPP, the famous Asian multilateral trade agreement that basically many of the Democrats oppose, Republicans oppose, I think it needed some work. But the moment we backed out of that agreement, we gave away all the leverage we had to bring China into the circle of accepted practices in terms of how to behave on the international stage. We knew that China was cheating on their international agreements. We knew that China was stealing intellectual property, and we should have known that a tariff war is a terrible tool to even contemplate using to resolve those problems. What we needed to do, and what we were getting towards doing, was building together an alliance of the world's economic powers and isolating China to the point where they agreed that they would respect intellectual property, they would stop cheating, they would become what my son referred one time as an adult member of the world. I probably shouldn't popularize that, he'll get in trouble with the Chinese government. Anyway, I look at Congress has to be an essential partner in terms of making sure that those trade agreements protect the rights of workers in the United States, that they have humane working conditions in the foreign countries, that we respect intellectual property, that the freedom of capital from all over the world is there are no barriers from one country or another. And there's a whole list of things we need to make sure we get right. But ultimately, Congress has to be a part of that. What else? Good. We've got 3 in a row right here. 1,
So-
2, 3.